For centuries, a single story has been repeated in classrooms, books, and popular culture that in 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America. It is a simple story, easy to remember, and powerful in its symbolism. But history is rarely simple, and this story, when examined closely, is deeply misleading. America was not an empty land waiting to be found, nor was Columbus the first outsider to reach its shores. Long before European sails appeared on the horizon, the Americas were home to millions of people, complex civilizations, vast trade networks, and rich cultural traditions stretching back thousands of years. To understand why Columbus did not discover America, we must look beyond the myth and return to the historical reality of what existed before his arrival, who truly came first, and what his voyage actually meant. Human presence in the Americas began at least 15,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. The ancestors of indigenous Americans migrated from Northeast Asia across a land bridge known as Beringia during the last ice age, when sea levels were lower and Asia and North America were connected. Over generations, these people spread across the continents, adapting to diverse environments, from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests. By the time Columbus was born in the 15th century, the Americas were not only inhabited, but thriving. Scholars estimate that between 50 and 70 million people lived across North, Central, and South America. These societies were not primitive or isolated. They were dynamic, innovative, and deeply connected to the land. In Mesoamerica, powerful civilizations rose and fell long before Europe's age of exploration. The Olmec civilization flourished as early as 1500 BCE, leaving behind colossal stone heads and evidence of complex religious systems. The Maya developed one of the most advanced writing systems in the ancient world, sophisticated mathematics, including the concept of zero, and highly accurate astronomical calendars. Their cities, such as Tikal and Palenque, were centers of learning, governance, and culture. In central Mexico, the Aztec Empire ruled over millions of people from their capital city of Tenochtitlan, a vast metropolis built on an island in Lake Texcoco, featuring canals, causeways, markets, and monumental architecture that astonished later European observers. Further south, the Inca Empire stretched along the Andes Mountains, forming the largest empire in the pre-Columbian Americas. Without wheeled vehicles or iron tools, the Inca built an extraordinary network of roads spanning thousands of miles, constructed agricultural terraces on steep mountain slopes, and managed a complex administrative system that supported millions of citizens. Their engineering achievements, such as Machu Picchu, continue to impress modern scholars. These civilizations, and many others, demonstrate a clear truth. America was already discovered, settled, and shaped by its own peoples long before Columbus ever sailed. Even from a European perspective, Columbus was not the first outsider to reach the Americas. Around the year 1000, nearly 5 centuries before Columbus, Norse explorers led by Leif Erikson sailed from Greenland and established a short-lived settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in present-day Newfoundland, Canada. Archaeological evidence confirms the presence of Viking structures, tools, and artifacts, making it the earliest known European contact with North America. While the Norse presence did not result in lasting colonization, it clearly disproves the idea that Columbus was the first European to arrive. Christopher Columbus himself was not searching for a new continent. His goal was to find a westward sea route to Asia, specifically to reach the wealthy markets of India, China, and the Spice Islands. He believed, incorrectly, that the Earth was smaller than it truly is, and that Asia could be reached quickly by sailing west across the Atlantic. When he landed in the Caribbean in October 1492, he was convinced he had reached islands off the coast of Asia. Until his death, Columbus insisted that he had found the outskirts of Asia, not a new world.
He never set foot on what is now the mainland of the United States, and he never understood the full geographical significance of his voyage. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean, he encountered the Taino people, who had lived on the islands for generations. They welcomed him with curiosity and generosity, offering food, water, and gifts. Columbus, however, viewed them not as equals, but as potential laborers and subjects for the Spanish crown. In his own journals, he described the indigenous people in terms that revealed his intentions, noting how easily they could be controlled and converted, and how useful they might be for extracting gold. This marked the beginning of a devastating era for indigenous populations. The arrival of Columbus initiated sustained contact between Europe and the Americas, an event often called the Columbiad Exchange. While this exchange involved the transfer of crops, animals, and technologies, it also brought catastrophic consequences. European diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly among indigenous populations who had no immunity. Entire communities were wiped out within decades. In some regions, indigenous populations declined by as much as 90%. This demographic collapse was one of the greatest tragedies in human history. Columbus's actions went far beyond exploration. On his later voyages, he established colonies, enforced brutal systems of forced labor, and oversaw acts of violence against indigenous people. Those who resisted were punished harshly, and many were slaved and sent to Europe. Historical records, including accounts by Spanish observers, described widespread suffering, mutilation, and death. Columbus's governance was so cruel and ineffective that he was eventually arrested by Spanish authorities and removed from power. These facts challenge the image of Columbus as a heroic figure and reveal a far more complex and troubling legacy. So why, despite all this evidence, has Columbus been credited with discovering America? The answer lies not in historical accuracy, but in power, perspective, and storytelling. For centuries, history was primarily written by European scholars who centered European experiences and achievements. From this point of view, lands became discovered only when Europeans arrived, regardless of who already lived there. This mindset erased indigenous peoples from the narrative and justified colonization as framing as progress rather than conquest. The myth of Columbus became especially prominent in the 19th century when the United States sought national heroes and unifying stories. Columbus was portrayed as a hero of courage, faith, and exploration, fitting neatly into a narrative of westward expansion and manifest destiny. Textbooks simplified his story, omitting indigenous civilizations, minimizing violence, and presenting his voyage as the beginning of American history. These simplified versions were easier to teach, but deeply misleading. Modern historians now emphasize that discovery is not a neutral term. A place cannot be discovered if it is already known, lived in, and named by millions of people. To say Columbus discovered America is to ignore indigenous knowledge, presence, and sovereignty. It also misrepresents what Columbus actually did. He opened the door to European colonization, exploitation, and transformation of the Americas, but he did not find a new land, nor did he understand its true nature. Recognizing this does not mean denying history. It means telling it more fully. Columbus's voyage was significant, but not because he discovered America. It was significant because it connected two worlds that had previously been largely separate, setting in motion global changes that reshaped economies, ecosystems, and societies on a massive scale. The consequences of this connection were both profound and devastating, especially for indigenous people whose histories had already stretched back millennia. Before Columbus, America was not a blank map. It was a living world of nations, languages, innovations, and traditions, from the mound builders of North America to the city-states of the Maya, from the agricultural knowledge that produced crops like corn and potatoes to trade networks that spanned continents. Indigenous peoples had already discovered, explored, and understood their world. Their histories did not begin in 1492, and they did not end with Columbus's arrival. Today, re-examining the story of Columbus is part of a broader effort to decolonize history and give voice to those long silenced. It is about replacing myths with evidence and acknowledging that the past is more complex than heroic legends suggest. Understanding why Columbus did not discover America allows us to see history not as a single triumphant narrative, but as a shared human story shaped by many peoples, many journeys, and many truths. In the end, America does not need to be discovered again. It needs to be remembered accurately. Remembered as a land with deep roots, ancient civilizations, and enduring cultures that existed long before European ships crossed the Atlantic. Remembered not as an empty world waiting for a name, but as a place already known, already lived in, and already rich with history. And remembered with honesty.
Because only by confronting the full truth of the past can we understand the world we live in today.